Okay, welcome everyone. Hello. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Juliette from the sustainability team at the City of Port Phillip. Excited you can join us for this lunchtime workshop on climate craftivism. I want to start off by acknowledging the Yalukit Willam clan of the Boomerang and pay my respect to their elders, past, present and emerging, and I acknowledge their continuing relationship to this land that we're on. Tal Fitzpatrick is our presenter today, and she's an award-winning artist, craftivist and researcher based on the Gold Coast, where she says it's 26 degrees today, but she used to live in Melbourne, so she knows what we're going through. Tal completed a PhD on socially engaged art, craft and activism that was titled Craftivism as DIY Citizenship, the practice of making change. She's led several global craftivism projects, which she'll tell us more about in a minute. And today she's going to start with a presentation to explain what craftivism is all about and show us some powerful local and international examples as well. She's going to talk us through her process and show us how we can get started on our own projects. As I've mentioned, we've set aside time for Tal to answer your questions at the end too. So now it's over to you, Tal. Thank you.
Thanks so much for the introduction, Juliette, and thanks so much for being here, everyone. I'm so excited to have you all here today and to chat a little bit about craftivism and get us started. First, before I begin, would also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land upon which I am talking to you from today, which is the Yugambeh and Kombumerri peoples here on the Gold Coast. I pay my deepest respects to their elders past, present, and I'd like to also extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Sovereignty has never been ceded, and this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I want to give a quick workshop overview, as well as just mention that right now we're in my studio here on the Gold Coast, and it's in an industrial area above this cool music venue. But you may hear some construction noise outside, so I apologise for that if you're wondering what the noise is. Yeah, that's what it is. So today's workshop is going to be kind of an introduction to craftivism with a strong focus on textiles, because I'm a textile-based artist who uses my craft applique, quilting and embroidery techniques to make my craftivist work. And we're going to focus it quite specifically on the way that craftivism can be used to address or talk about the climate crisis. So a big part of today is hopefully gathering some inspirations and ideas for all of you ahead of what might be the things that you make for the climate strike, which is on the 21st of May at the end of this month, or World Environment Day, which is coming up to on the 5th of June. At the very end, we're going to go back and talk to Juliette, because she's actually organised some in-person making events and opportunities that you guys will hopefully be able to take part in. So this is kind of like a preface to that actual experience of collective making that we would love to offer you. So today's more about inspiration and getting to ask me some questions at the end, hopefully. I'm going to try rush through a lot of content, but speak slowly enough so that it's easy to follow. I've also put most of the stuff you need to know on the slides themselves, and I wanted to note that I will be sharing this presentation with everyone who's registered to be part of this event, so you don't need to freak out about taking notes or the fact that you missed something, because you will be getting this as well as I've included a list of craftivists and textile artists that inspire me at the end of this, and a list of books and a few other resources that I think will be useful to you at the end of this. So hopefully you'll walk away with quite a lot of practical information, even though it's not a making workshop per se. So let's get started with the question, what is craftivism? I did like we already kind of flagged, Juliette said, I did my PhD about craftivism, and as part of that, this is how I defined the practice, which was originally kind of coined by a writer and maker called Betsy Greer in 2003. but I define it as both a strategy for non-violent activism and a mode of DIY or do-it-together citizenship that looks to influence positive social and political change. This uniquely 21st century practice involves a combination of craft techniques with elements of social media or digital engagement as part of a practical effort to bring attention to, pragmatically address issues of social, political, and environmental justice. Craftivism can take many different forms, including acts of donation, beautification, notification, or be deployed for its individual capacity building and therapeutic benefits, or even for its ability to strengthen social connections and enhance community resilience, for example, in disaster-affected communities. Having said that, I want to very much place emphasis on the fact that craftivism has a very long history in the form of the worldwide use of craft as a strategy for activism or advocacy, and as my colleague Dr. Alice McGovern explains, whether demanding action on political issues, making a statement about war, drawing attention to environmental harms, highlighting injustice, or preserving traditions in the face of colonial rule, craftivism has a history long before its contemporary incarnations. And although the most widely celebrated historical examples of craft and activism tend to focus on the efforts of white women, as do the majority of what is written about craftivism in today. So historical examples include the Raja quilt, which was an exhibition in Melbourne a couple of years ago. I hope you all got to see it, and the suffragette banners, which are quite often cited as an early example of craftivism. The point is, the reality is that this history spans across many cultures and geographic locations, with notable examples including Gandhi's use of the spinning wheel, the Apurela movement in Chile, the commemorative textiles of West Africa, the work of the Gee's Bend quilters in Alabama, as well as here I've got an example from the queer community, which is the biggest to date collective communal art project, the AIDS Memorial Quilt. And there's an example there as well from Mexico, a project called the Movement of Embroidery for Peace. So yeah, I do just want to stress that this is a practice that cuts across cultures and languages and different kinds of communities. I've written a little handbook about craftivism, which I'll share with you all as a PDF. You can get it as a free download from my website. But as part of that, I wanted to focus today on the question of like why craftivism, because obviously, particularly with an issue like climate change, which is so big and feels so ominous, I guess. In life, there's so many things going on simultaneously that it's hard to know where to start. I often suggest craftivism as an entry point for people who are looking to engage in activism but don't quite know how to start. So here, I'm just going to read this excerpt from the Craftivist methodology manifesto that I've written. Craftivism is a practice built on the appreciation that change starts with one. That change is something that each citizen is able to contribute to by doing their part, however small. For this reason, craftivists approach change as an everyday process that begins when people learn to alter their own habits and beliefs, and which spreads as a result of people's material actions and interventions in private, public, and institutional spaces. The collective result of these interventions is that together, through the collective action of citizens, sustainable change becomes possible. Now, obviously, I don't think that we need to put the onus of addressing climate change on the individual, and addressing a global problem like climate change requires us to change industries, to change the minds of governments, to change our attitudes towards it will take an overhaul of capitalism, I guess. But in saying that, we need to feel like we are part of the solution, and as people who are passionate about this, we need to start somewhere. So craft is a place where you can start. and then build outwards if you think of yourself as a little node of potential change. So as this little cute illustration shares, until you fix it in here and address it in your home, nothing changes around the world. So in the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, it's kind of talked about as in your circle of control, which, if you think about it simply, is just what in your life that you have control over, what you have for dinner, what you buy at the shops, your sphere of influence, so the people in your life who listen to you and trust your opinion. And then your circle of concern is a much bigger circle, all the things that you care about, that you're passionate about, that you're worried about. So the question is, how do you go from the things you care about and the people you're connected to and make that jump to the broader issues? And here's kind of what I propose in relation to how craftivism can link with that. So, of course, all change making starts by listening, learning, and finding our own voice once we're well informed, and then doing what we can to act on our own values. So here, what we can do using our craft is create art that helps us to express our values and beliefs with the hope that we'll be able to connect with like-minded people. From there, we can start to share our knowledge, what we've listened to, what we've learned, and have complex conversations with the people in our lives, the people who we have influence over, in the hope that we can change their minds, change their habits, help them to take action themselves. And here we can use creativity as a way to help connect with people, because craft or making art is something fun that is engaging for people, that people want to be a part of. And again, helping them to then find their voice and take action to express their own values is something that will empower them as it has empowered us. The next step, again, is it's all about finding ways to connect with like-minded people. So you can use creativity here as a way to really come together, take targeted, direct, collective action, move towards that bigger, more coordinated activist movements, which we will need in order to lobby governments to make changes at all scales. So let's start to talk about some examples. With the conversation about the climate crisis and craftivism, I wanted to bring upcycling, reuse and mending first and foremost, because a large portion of the craftivism and environmental art communities are really dedicated to the reduction and reuse of waste, particularly textile waste, which for us in this community is a really big issue, because the apparel industry accounts for 10% of the carbon emissions globally and remains the second largest industrial polluter, second only to oil, which is pretty frightening. And to this end, many artists and makers are committed to the practices of mending and upcycling and focusing on using materials that would otherwise become landfills. So thinking about reusing old clothes, which is something that I often do. And here in these examples of my own work, you can see I've been collecting denim from my own use and from my friends and family, and I've made that into a big quilt, and I've also transformed that into this sashiko coat, where I've used a traditional Japanese style of embroidery to kind of embellish this garment that I've made. So that's one way where we can start to incorporate activism into our daily life, just through the way that we think about and use materials. And I've also taken that attitude to the kind of public art projects that I do, these participatory public art projects. So this PM Please Quilt is an example I made with the contribution of 121 people who sent me messages via Instagram or Twitter that they wanted to send to the Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, when he first came into office. And what I did was use suit swatches and ties, as you can see here around the edges, to make this quilt, which was then gifted to the Prime Minister and now hangs at the Museum of Australian Democracy in Canberra. And it's covered with lots of the messages that people sent were actually about the environment. So you can see here in the corner, PM Please Put the Environment First is something that one person embroidered onto the quilt. And again, this idea of handmaking, gift giving, is an interesting way to start these kind of complex conversations that we need to have. Obviously, if we were just sending the Prime Minister these messages via Twitter, he probably wouldn't have seen them, but he saw this quilt in person and he has responded to it with a letter that is also hanging by this project at the museum. So you can start to see how you can use this practice as a way to lobby governments, basically. This is another example of another artist doing the same kind of thing. A friend of mine, Tara Glastonbury, did this great project just as the fires were happening in early 2020. It's called the ScoMo Prayer Flags, and she invited people online to, again, embroider their message to the Prime Minister. That's mine here in this big image. Don't forget, there is no economy on a dead planet. So that's just another example of a similar kind of use of craft to talk to the public and to politicians. I'm going to give two other big examples that are not of my own work. One is the Knitting Nanas Against Gas and Greed, who are an amazing Australian-based organisation of crafters and knitters specifically, who have since 2012 been doing amazing work advocating for the change to renewables and trying to stop mining, particularly coal seam gas mining in their communities. And they do that by bearing witness, knitting on site as they are protesting and sitting in front of tractors, but also in cities in front of political buildings. Yeah, they do great work, and I highly recommend you going to check them out in the way that they use craft as a strategy for activism. Another great project is the Crochet Coral Reef project, which is about the state of our coral reef and uses craft and crochet specifically as a way to educate the public about these amazing underwater ecosystems, and to talk about the devastation and the state of these ecosystems and what we can do to protect them. So another really amazing project that's travelled all over the world, has been going for multiple years and included hundreds and hundreds of makers from around the world in the making of it and in the conversations about the need to address climate change. So two really amazing examples of how craft is bringing people together to advocate for climate change. Climate action rather. So let's talk about making something for yourselves. Hopefully, I've broken this down into kind of 5 rough steps. So we're going to go bit by bit, and I'm going to talk about a few different kinds of mediums that I use, but yeah, we'll get to that. The first thing you need to do, obviously, is brainstorm an issue or an idea. If you're going to spend time and energy doing something in craft, it takes a little bit longer than just getting out a piece of cardboard and drawing on it with a texter. So you want to make sure that you're really passionate about the issue that you pick. So my first question to you, if you want to answer it in the chat, you're super welcome to, is what specific climate issue are you most passionate about? Once we've kind of thought about that, what the thing is that's really motivating us, then we can start to think about crafting a message. So my second question is, what will your banner say? And this is sometimes the hardest bit to come up with. So I highly recommend going online and Googling some of the amazing protest banners that have been used during the school strike for climate, for example, or the large global protests that we've seen. There's some really funny and amazing messages that people have been sharing that you're welcome to reuse and make your own. But the other thing I recommend is that you consider what the most succinct way to convey your message is. Again, less is often more on a banner, particularly if you're going to be stitching it and it's going to take you a long time. And also that you should have a bit of a ponder about the tone of your message, which can be really important to a piece. So it can, and how it's received by audiences. So is it funny? Is it factual? Is it sarcastic? Is it shouty? I will have been known to make a shouty banner. I guess you want to think about your audience and the kind of impact that you want to make. The great thing about craft is that due to its very materiality, you have a bit of leeway to be more aggressive, because the materiality of the work is associated with femininity and with these kind of soft, unthreatening historical ideas of women that give you a bit of leeway to do something a bit more edgy without getting in trouble. So I highly recommend playing around with that interesting dynamic. Next, I guess you choose a medium. And there are lots of different craft mediums you could use to make your statement about the need for climate action. Think knitting, crochet, weaving, lace making, macrame, beading, felting, natural dyeing, etc., etc. I use applique quilting banners, felt banners, and embroidery, and I'll sometimes even make paper posters. So my final question, if you want to share in the chat, is what craft medium are you most interested in? And answering this will be helpful for us when we're thinking about what we might be able to provide you as additional resources and materials in the workshops that are coming up. So do answer this one if you can. And I'm going to give you a few examples. So once you've got your medium and your message, come up with a design. This can also be tricky, and again, I recommend going and taking a look at what other people have made. I'm going to be sharing a bunch of my favorite artists and craftivists at the end, so you'll be able to go away and look up some of those names. But I highly recommend taking inspiration from the actual materials as well. So, for example, I will often look for a piece of fabric in my collection that really speaks to me or speaks to a particular issue. And then use that to guide me with the size and shape, composition, color, pattern, texture, basic design stuff. I highly recommend that you trace your design or use a projector to transfer it from paper or from your computer to the banner to help you with that scale. It's not cheating, it's just smart. So one of the common things that I do workshops in is felt applique banners, which are a really easy, fun place to start. All you need is a piece of felt, if you have one. Hopefully you can reuse it from something else. This pennant shape is a really fun shape. And then, again, choose a message, bedazzle it, cut out letters. I use my sewing machine often to make little applique pieces that can be stitched down onto a background. And you can just easily fold the top over that and put a stick through it, and then take that to the next protest you go to, like Jackie did, who came to a workshop I did at in Canberra, and then took the banner she made out to the next Extinction Rebellion action that she was a part of in Canberra. So that's what you can see here. The photos are from that action, and it I think really adds to what they're doing here in front of the National Press Club of Australia. So yeah, do take your banner out once you've made it. This is an example of some of my work. I make large-scale quilted wall hangings. These aren't specifically about climate change, but they give you a kind of good idea of the infinity of ways that you can take your design and how creative you can be with color and pattern. And yeah, there's lots more of my work that you can find online if you want to look closer at it. The next thing I really love doing is using embroidery hoops. They're a really fun and easy place to start so far as making something. I recommend choosing a light coloured fabric so that you can transfer your design onto it really easily, then mount it on a hoop, cut out your applique pieces, stitch them down, and once you finish you can either actually display it in the hoop, or you can get it framed, or just take it out and just use the cloth. You can make it as a patch and put it on your clothing. There's lots of options. I do too want to flag that these make really cute gifts. and that you could gift them to like a local politician or a local business owner as a way to start a conversation about your concerns and your ideas for positive change. So again, these are little things that you can use to create openings and opportunities for connection and for complex conversations. Here's a little step-by-step of how I made this little embroidery hoop. You can see it can be very simple. I will often glue these letters down before I stitch them to save them moving around. You can pin them if you don't want to glue, but there's some really easy fabric glue that's good to use these days that I highly recommend, particularly for beginners. The next thing I want to flag is that actual embroidery is an amazing skill that is super useful, not just in creating artworks like this portrait that I made here of an amazing disability rights activist in the States, Alice Wong, but also as a way to mend and repair clothing and extend the life of things like bags. So highly recommend improving your embroidery skills and seeing if you can apply those to extending the life of the materials around you. And the last kind of banner making I wanted to show you is just the good old poster, which can also benefit greatly from a little bit of craft finesse. You can see here when I was Googling for inspiration, these are the kind of images that I use to then create my composition. And I made this just using textures and felt and printing out Dorothy. You can see it's actually quite a big poster. And this is a super fun thing to do with young people and with children. It helps encourage them to engage with these topics and also creates an opportunity for them to voice their concerns and opinions, which is really important in kind of empowering the next generation to be a part of this change-making process. Finally, I would suggest that you share your work, and this is where social media often comes in for craftivists. It's such an easy place to share your work with a really international kind of cross-section of people, and it's a really fun way to connect with like-minded people all around the world too. I've listed a few hashtags here that you might want to use when you're sharing your banner, including the Climate Strike, World Environment Day, and craftivism textile banners. If you also use those to search on Instagram, you'll be able to find lots of examples of the kind of work people are doing around the world. By the way, take a note of this beautiful banner here that was made by a friend of mine, Rebecca Ray, during a workshop I did in 2019. It's a really beautifully made example of the kind of thing you could be doing. And from there, once you feel a bit confident or you've got a little group of people that are interested in doing something similar, you can start to work together again to build your sphere of influence, expand your circle of concern, and collaborate with like-minded people. So examples of this include the ones we've already talked about, like the Crochet Coral Reef, which included lots of different makers. And I've also got some different examples of how you can use social media to connect online, like the COVID-19 quilt project that artist Kate Just and I have been working on for the past year. It's not climate related, but it is an example of how you can use social media to work with people all around the world to talk about a specific issue. These are the additional resources I'm going to share with you. Firstly, YouTube is a super important friend of yours. Anything you want to make, there's a tutorial about it. Google it. There's also lots of really amazing textile banner making resources, including the stuff that's up around the Protest Banner Library project by artist Hans Cifuentes. And there's a really great tips and tricks guide that I'm also going to share with you, which is PDF that goes through step-by-step for making applique textile banners. This is my list of just a few of the artists and makers that I'm really inspired by. You'll get a copy of these so you don't have to freak out, but just look them up. They're so talented and so amazing. I'll also include a list of books that you guys should follow up on, including Betsy Greer's Craftivism, the art and craft of activism, which is amazing. The Subversive Stitch from 1984 is a really good example of how craft has been used by women throughout history to kind of talk about issues they're passionate about. And I really want to get to the questions, so I'm going to continue pushing us forward because I want to have a chat with you all. But if there is something specific you want to ask me, not in the chat, feel free to find me on Instagram or on Twitter. These are my handles, and this is my website and my email if you want to write to me as well. I'm not always on the other side of this computer that we're all on. So I'll go back here and stop sharing for now.
Thanks so much, Tal. That was super inspiring, and I love the slide about repairing is a form of activism. I'll keep that in mind as I'm doing my little handy repairs in future. We've had some really good comments about people, the topics they're interested in, the types of messaging that they'd like to use. There's a lot of interest in talking about the importance of trees, sequestering carbon through vegetation. The mediums people have talked about is natural dyeing, embroidery, applique, knitting and sewing. So it was great. It sounds like there's a lot of interest in the topic, in the mediums that you've addressed. We've had a question here. Does anyone know if CWA groups are involved in craftivism? I'm not sure if you're able to answer that, Tal.
I think you'll find that there's a lot of people involved in craftivism that don't self-identify as craftivists. So if you're thinking about it, for example, maybe as I would as a researcher thinking about this, I could definitely look at some of the work that is being done in communities like the CWA and say, well, they're using craft and they're selling their handcrafted work to raise money for an issue that they're really passionate about and to go back and support their communities. And therefore, that is a form of activism, that's a form of change making. So yes, that could be considered craftivism. In saying that, craftivism is a term that not everyone loves, and I wouldn't I wouldn't talk about people who don't self-identify as craftivists as craftivists. So I don't know if that's a helpful answer to that question. But yeah, there are lots of amazing local communities and local, crafting, quilting guilds using their skills, the skills that they have on hand as a way to raise money and awareness for the issues that they're passionate about, for sure.
Excellent. Have you got any projects that you're currently working on that you want to tell us about?
For sure. The project I'm currently working on doesn't quite talk to climate activism, which is kind of why I didn't bring it up. But we can go take a look at it. I'm going to bring it up on here and then I'll share it with you all. It's called the COVID-19 quilt. So if any of you have your phone handy and are on Instagram, you can follow us. It was started by Kate and I a week after Melbourne went into lockdown. I'm sure you all remember last year, I was there with you. Kate and I realized that our online craft community would be using craft as a way to talk about the experiences that they were going through, and we wanted to create a place where we could come together to share what that looked like. So we created an Instagram feed, which became the quilt. So this isn't a physical artwork, it's actually a digital artwork. And you can see here, this is the profile, and this is what the quilt looks like. So it looks like a collection of contributions that we've had from 28 different countries around the world. We've had over 500 people submit. And along with these handcrafted works, people have been sharing messages as well. So you can see here on the threads is from Sydney, and it's a really cute, sad little piece about the places we won't go during lockdown. Some of them are funny, some of them are sad, Some of them talk about loss quite openly. Some of them are quite political. There's a lot of masks incorporated into people's work. But the really powerful thing about this project is the way that it combines people's stories as told in their own words through these messages and their handcrafted work. There's something really potent and powerful about the handmade that I think carries a lot of emotional weight and that audiences resonate with. So, for example, whenever I'm carrying a handcrafted banner at a protest, I get lots of people stopping me and asking to take pictures and commenting on the banners. And I think because it's something that I invested time and care in, it elicits care from the audiences. And I think that's something quite powerful about the medium of craftivism that is an important thing to consider when you're thinking about why bothering to make a work like this that takes time when you could be, outside planting trees. The other thing I think is important to remember is that activism and engaging in activism is something that can be take a lot of energy and it can run us down. Fatigue is something that is very common in the activist community, and engaging in something like craftivism is almost a way for us who are introverts or who are crafters to kind of recoup some of that energy without feeling like we've given up or walked away from the cause that we're passionate about. So we can continue to kind of illustrate that we care about something and that we're thinking about it, while also doing something that can almost be seen as a form of self-care. And I think there needs to be a place for that, for a place for us to enjoy the thing that we're doing in our activism. A place where we can retreat to and kind of gather our energy, so that we can go back out there and do the harder work, which is, also important. So I'm not at all proposing you do this instead of any other forms of activism, but that it can be a really complementary to your existing activist practice.
Okay, thank you. We've had a question, are there any projects that we can get on board with or come together and build something big, like making a square for a big quilt, etc.?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't know a specific one off the top of my head that is to do with climate action in Melbourne right now. But that is the exact kind of thing that you guys as a group, or that you as an artist might say, look, I'd love to put together a quilt about climate action and to use that in the upcoming, even exhibit it. It's important to talk about these issues in lots of different spaces. And it's not that hard to start a project like that, is what I want to really stress with you guys. The project that Kate, Just and I started was literally just starting an Instagram page and putting out an invitation for people to submit. And over the year and whatever it's been, forever, since the pandemic started, we've had, over 500 people submit. We didn't know or anticipate we'd have such an amazing reaction. We just created an opportunity for people, like-minded people, to connect and to share. And I think people really want to do that. So if you have an idea like that or a passion to do something like that, even if you don't have all the technical skills, there'll be someone in your circle, your sphere of influence that is also interested, that would love to work with you on something like that. And you can kind of build momentum from there.
We've also got a list, I'll just add to that, there's a list of local environmental groups on the Port Phillip Council website. If you just Google environmental community groups Port Phillip, and that could be a good place to start touching base with some of those groups that already exist, because they've already got a little network of people that are engaged on this topic.
Totally. And if you guys are part of any climate groups, this is an activity you could take into that group to say, hey, I'd love to make a banner for our group, as a way for us to share this with a different kind of audience. I did a project where I worked with a few different organizations last year and created banners for them based on their designs. And one of those was the Pacific Climate Rallies. We made this banner, which was in language. and they now use it during their own events, and as part of their own way that they engage with the young people in the organisation. Now they've started to incorporate a bit more craft making processes into that, because they found it a really good way to get young people talking, just by asking them, what would you put on a banner, what ideas do you have? It was a really generative way for them to get young people involved in the activities of the organisation.
We've had a question too about which are the communities that you know of that are really spearheading these types of projects? And you talked about the Knitting Nanas in the Northern Rivers of New South Wales, but which other are the prominent communities that you know of?
So far as like large scale groups engaging in craft activism? Yeah,
using craftivism and leading those sorts of projects.
Yeah, I do have lots of examples. They're not, again, all specific to climate action. I find that, but it's a funny kind of double thing where it's like most craftivist projects, the big projects that I know of, aren't necessarily specifically about climate action, but they all have it at the core of the way that they go about their work. So thinking about the way they use materials, the way they reuse waste. I think there's some really good examples from other communities where, and I might share these when I follow up, but there's some examples of communities in South America and in Africa using things like thongs and plastic garbage to like make these really beautiful animals and sculptures, which they then sell to support their local communities, but also use it as a way to reduce waste and bring attention to waste. So that's, I think, a good example of another craft-based activity that's going on.
There's a few suggestions in the group. Belinda's just put the Knitting Nanas of Tulangi, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, are a great local group in Victoria.
Yeah, so the Knitting Nanas Against Gas and Greed have local chapters, basically.
Right. Probably now's a good time to mention the opportunity of the craft session that we've organised as a follow-up to today's workshop, and we're holding this in St Kilda on the 29th of May, and really it's a chance for you all to come along, meet with like-minded people who are interested in this topic, talk more about craftivism, maybe start a group project or start your own personal project. We'll be holding that at the Space to Be workshop space in St Kilda, 11 a.m. till 1 p.m. on the 29th of May. I'll pop in the booking link into the chat bar because the space is limited to 20 people, so unfortunately it will be first in, best dressed, but hoping that some of you can join us for that. Bring along your craft materials, and we'll have some examples and a few copies of Tal's manifesto to have a look through and have a good chat together as well. And we'll be putting on some food and coffee at that session too, so hope you can make it for that. We've had a question about is there a good resource for kids to learn to stitch or beginner adults that you recommend, Tal?
Question. I'll do some research to see if there's one specifically for young people, so far as like an illustrated something or other, but I do think that particularly for beginners, having someone show you is the absolute best place to start, and you don't have to be that good to start. I highly recommend using cross stitching as a way to start with young people. I've often done that in my workshops because if you find some Aida cloth, which is what this is, you might not be able to see here, but there's really tiny squares, and you just make X's. And I find that kids it's like pixel art. They pick that up really quickly, and there's different sized Aida cloths, and you can also get plastic needles if you're working with really young kids. So yeah, starting with a really basic stitch like that, I think, is a really good way to start. And then just playing around, I think, is the best thing to excite young people about getting into this. And you'll be surprised the kind of young people that I've worked with. I did a project out at Backtrack Youth Works in Armidale, who it's an amazing organisation that support young people who were in and out of the justice system and struggling with schools, mostly young men. And I went and did a workshop where we designed and created this really big story quilt that told the story of this organisation, but also as part of those workshops I had them all cross-stitching, and it was hilarious and adorable.
A lot of the people in the chat are talking about the issue of climate anxiety, climate grief, and how this is a really great way to process that, and particularly with their children that they're experiencing. So that's a really important point you touched on, I think. Yeah,
I really think that's very true. It is a very almost debilitating issue in its scale and its severity, and I think particularly talking with young people, it can be very frightening for them, but we are seeing great leadership from young people about this issue, and they're really driving this. If you look at the school strike for climate, those kind of actions are really making a difference in the way that we talk about this, and the way that in our attitudes towards this issue as a society. So I think the more we can do to raise young people up, to support them, to encourage them, to make sure that they're looking after their mental health and not just disengaging because it becomes overwhelming. I think, yeah, craftivism and craft can be a part of that. I think that's a really good thing.
Very good. If anyone had any last questions, pop them in the chat bar now. Otherwise, I'll just tell you about some other sustainability events that our team's running that are coming up. They're not on the topic of craftivism, but they should be very interesting and also being held online and free. The first one is about how you can retrofit your home to make it flood resilient. So particularly people who are living in the Elster Creek catchment, this is a great event for you to find out what you can do within your home, within your existing home, to make it better survive increasing flooding. On the 19th of May, that's happening from 7 till 8:30 p.m. The second event we're running at the City of Port Phillip is a solar info session on our solar program, which basically is about helping residents, making it easier for you to install solar on the rooftop of your home. So there'll be information about that program, how council can help, how to navigate solar suppliers, and the government rebates that are available to you. And that's happening on the 1st of June, 6 till 7 p.m. You can register for any of these events, and I'll pop the craft session registration up on our website too, portphillip.vic.gov.au/sustainability. Also, just want to let you know that the sustainability team at the City of Port Phillip is always available to answer any of your questions. If you're wanting to make some changes in your home, if you work for a business that wants to do some, take some steps in the sustainability space, we're here to support the community. So we can always be contacted at enviro@portphillip.vic.gov.au. So please do get in touch with any feedback or any questions that you have. Is there anything else I wanted to mention? I'll just check if there's any last questions. People are sharing book tips and places to go for stitching and crafting, mentioning the library is a great resource, obviously, to get craft books from. There's someone in our group today that's actually written a book, which is pretty amazing. And someone's linked to a TED Talk there too.
TED Talk is by Sarah Corbett, who's one of the, along with Betsy Greer, one of the main kind of public figures talking about this and publishing about this space. She also has a book called How to Be a Craftivist that will be in the list that I send you all. So yeah, her TED Talk is a good place to start if you want to watch something else straight after this.
Right, yeah, that's the one that's been linked to. So we'll be sending out this recording of today's session so you can re-watch it if you want to go through the steps that Tal talked us through. And as she mentioned, we'll send out some more resources if you're interested in digging deeper into this topic. There'll be a whole stack of things that you can look into in that list, so look out for that email. And oh, there's just a question. Will the chat? No, the chat won't be in the recording, but we can certainly do a little summary of some of the resources that were shared within the chat box today too. So I'll make sure to do that too.
Those comments that are like, go here, read this, into the resources that we send you guys as a follow-up, so you don't need to worry about that either.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you, Libby. I'll include the links that were shared in the chat box in the follow-up email. Apart from that, I just want to say thank you to Tal for joining us today, sharing your wisdom and your beautiful artwork with us. And enjoy the rest of your day, everyone, and hope to see you on the 29th of May at our in-person craft session in St Kilda.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming, everyone. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day, and hopefully you got something out of it. Like I said, if you want to find me, please do reach me on Instagram or by email. I'm happy to hear what you have to say.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Bye.